The Vampire King mocked his ugly bride, until he lifted her veil and froze in shock. The great hall of Thornwick Castle reeked of ancient stone and desperation. Torches flickered against walls that had seen 7 centuries of darkness, and tonight they would witness what King Ravenna had called the most ridiculous arrangement of his immortal life. The ceremony was deliberately sparse. No grand celebration, no choir of supernatural beings, just the Vampire King, his council of 3 ancient lords, and a human girl standing at the altar whose face no one had seen. She wore a veil so thick and dark that even the candlelight couldn't penetrate it. Ravenna sat upon his throne, arms crossed, his silver eyes gleaming with contempt. He was beautiful in the way dangerous things are beautiful, sharp cheekbones, midnight black hair that fell past his shoulders, and a mouth that hadn't smiled in perhaps 200 years. His tailored black suit seemed to absorb light itself. "This is beneath me," he muttered to Lord Kieran, the eldest of his advisers, a vampire whose face looked like carved marble. "To marry a human, to participate in this political arrangement." "Your kingdom is dying, my lord," Kieran replied quietly. "The humans breach our borders more each season. The werewolf territories grow bolder. The only way to broker peace with the human council is through this union, a show of goodwill, a symbol that we can coexist." Ravenna's jaw clenched. "I don't do symbols, I rule through fear and blood." "Perhaps that's why your kingdom crumbles," Kieran said, and despite the cold tone, there was the faintest hint of sympathy in his ancient eyes. The girl was led forward by the High Priestess, a woman with silver hair and eyes that had witnessed things mortal minds couldn't comprehend. The bride wore a gown of white silk that cost more than most human villages, but the veil remained drawn. Ravenna had refused to see her beforehand. He'd refused to know anything about her except that she was some political offering from the human council, a daughter of a minor noble family, unremarkable, forgettable. "Perhaps they sent us an ogre," sneered Lord Demon, the youngest of the 3 councillors, his crimson eyes dancing with amusement. "That would explain the veil." "Or a crone," added Lord Bastian, the massive one whose shoulders seemed to span the width of a door. "Some ancient hag they wanted to dispose of." The girl didn't react. She stood perfectly still, her hands trembling slightly as they held her bouquet of black roses. Even her breathing seemed calculated, controlled. "Let's get this farce over with," Ravenna said, waving a hand dismissively. The priestess began the ceremony, speaking in the old language, a tongue that sounded like wind through graveyards. The words of binding, of union, of eternal darkness. It was a vampire marriage rite, which meant it would be binding until death, and since Ravenna was immortal, that meant forever. When they reached the moment where vows would be exchanged, Ravenna didn't bother with flowery words. He simply stated the bare minimum required by law, his tone carrying no more emotion than if he were ordering dinner. "I, King Ravenna of Thornwick, accept this union for the sake of political stability and nothing more. I make no promises of kindness, affection, or devotion. You are a means to an end, a walking treaty." A low breath escaped from beneath the veil. Pain, resignation, Ravenna didn't care enough to wonder. The girl's vow was so quiet that even the vampires had to strain to hear it. "I accept," she whispered. "I accept this union and its terms." "Then by the old laws and the darkness eternal you are bound," the priestess intoned. "What remains is the only ritual that matters." She gestured toward the veil. This was the moment every wedding attended, the unveiling, the moment when all would see the bride's true face. It was tradition as old as vampire law itself. No bonds could be sealed until both faces were revealed to witnesses. Ravenna rose from his throne, descending the steps to the altar with the fluid grace of a predator. The girl's body tensed as he approached. He could smell her fear, that distinctive perfume of adrenaline and mortality that usually drove vampires to madness. But Ravenna had long ago learned control. He reached for the veil with one pale hand, his fingers adorned with a ring of black diamond. For just a moment he paused. He could feel her trembling. "Pathetic," he murmured. "Even her terror is weak." Then he lifted it and froze it. The world stopped. The torches seemed to pause in their flickering. Even the ancient stones of Thornwick Castle seemed to hold their breath. The girl's face was not ugly, not even remotely. She was exquisite. Her skin was pale, luminous even in the candlelight, the kind of skin that looked like it had never known the sun. Her eyes were a shade of violet that shouldn't exist in nature, large and rimmed with dark lashes that cast shadows on her cheekbones. Those cheekbones were high and elegant, her nose delicate and perfectly proportioned. Her lips were full and crimson, as if she were already becoming one of his kind. But it wasn't just her physical beauty that stopped his eternal heart. There was something in her expression, something in the way she met his gaze with that violet stare, an intelligence there, a depth. She was looking at him not with fear or subservience but with recognition, as if she saw through every layer of darkness he'd spent 200 years constructing, and she wasn't impressed or horrified by what she found. She was simply assessing him. "Well," she said, her voice no longer trembling. It was steady, almost amused. "Do I meet your expectations, my lord?" Ravenna couldn't speak. His ancient heart, which had been silent and still for 2 centuries, suddenly beat. Once, twice. It was the most terrifying thing that had happened to him in 200 years. Lord Kieran cleared his throat delicately, suppressing what might have been a smile. Lord Demon's crimson eyes widened. Even Lord Bastian seemed momentarily struck dumb. Ravenna began, then stopped. What could he possibly say? "Not what you expected," the girl finished, tilting her head slightly. Her dark hair cascaded down the front of her white gown, framing that perfect, terrible face. "The council did mention you were arrogant. They didn't mention you were rude." A sound escaped Ravenna then, something between a gasp and a growl. The girl didn't flinch. "What is your name?" he demanded, his voice rough in a way it hadn't been in decades. "Does it matter?" she replied. "You already said I'm just a means to an end, a walking treaty." And with that she turned away from him, her veil falling back into place as the priestess guided her down from the altar. Ravenna stood frozen, his hand still extended where her veil had been, watching her disappear into the shadows of the castle. His 3 counselors exchanged meaningful glances. It was Lord Kieran who finally broke the silence. "Well," the ancient vampire said, his voice carrying a note of satisfaction, "perhaps this arrangement will not be entirely disastrous after all." 3 weeks passed. Ravenna had made a point of avoiding his bride. He threw himself into kingdom matters with renewed intensity, inspecting borders, reviewing trade agreements, planning strategies against the werewolf territories. Anything to not think about Violet Eyes and the way she dismissed him with such casual indifference. He told himself it was because she was beneath him, because he had a kingdom to run and no time for the strange, unsettling feeling in his chest that hadn't existed before he lifted that veil. But the castle had a way of forcing encounters. He found her in the library on the 21st night, curled in a leather chair near the window that looked out onto the moorlands. She wore a dark gown, nothing like the white wedding dress, and her hair was loose, falling in waves past her shoulders. Books were stacked around her, histories, poetry, old texts in languages most humans couldn't read. "Shouldn't you be resting?" he asked from the doorway, not bothering with pleasantries. "Your kind needs sleep." She looked up, not startled. Nothing ever seemed to startle her. "I thought you were avoiding me, my lord." "I have been." "Then this is unexpected." She closed her book, an ancient leather-bound volume on vampire bloodlines. "Have you come to inspect your new possession? Make sure the merchandise is still functional." There was no anger in her tone, just that same mild amusement. It was infuriating. "Why are you reading about vampire bloodlines?" he demanded. "Because I live in a castle full of them, because you're my husband, apparently, because knowledge is the one thing they can't take from a person." She gestured to the chair across from hers. "Unless you'd prefer to continue standing in the doorway like a shadow." He should have left. Instead, he found himself crossing the room and settling into the chair she'd indicated. This was a mistake. Being close to her was a mistake. He could smell her, that distinct scent that was uniquely hers, like roses and rain and something metallic, something almost like blood but not quite. "Your name," he said. "I never learned it." "No, you didn't. You made it clear you didn't care enough to ask." She opened her book again, but she didn't seem to be reading. "It's Cassandra. The council calls me Cass." "Cassandra," he repeated. The name felt significant on his tongue. The prophet, the cursed one doomed to speak truths no one would believe. My parents had a sense of irony. They sat in silence for a moment. Outside, the wind howled across the moors, a sound that had always brought Ravenna a strange comfort, the sound of emptiness, of isolation. "Why did you agree to this?" he asked. "To marry someone you'd never met, to be bound to a vampire king who made his disdain abundantly clear." Cassandra was quiet for a long moment. When she finally spoke, her voice was different, less amused, more honest. Because I was dying, she said simply. A wasting sickness. The doctors gave me 6 months. Your council offered my family a fortune and a way to save face. A daughter married off instead of buried, and they offered me something else. What? A chance to be something other than a victim of circumstance. She finally looked at him, those violet eyes catching the lamplight. My entire life I've been told what I should be, how I should behave, who I should marry when I should die. I was 18 years old and my body was failing me. Then your council came with an offer, and for the first time I had a choice, even if the choice was between a terrible fate and an uncertain one. Ravenna found himself leaning forward slightly. The sickness, is it? Gone, she confirmed. That's the thing about being bound to a vampire, apparently. Your blood is in mine now. It burned out the sickness like fire through dry grass. It hurt, she added almost conversationally, but it was worth it. I didn't know that was a possibility. No, I suspect your council didn't tell you much. They probably didn't tell you that this arrangement was supposed to be beneficial to both parties, not just political theatre, or that binding with you would save my life. She tilted her head. Did they tell you anything true about me at all? Ravenna realized with a crawling sense of discomfort that they hadn't. He'd refused to hear details about his bride. He demanded ignorance, and now he was paying the price. We should return to your chambers, he said stiffly. It's late. I like it here, Cassandra replied, but if you're uncomfortable with my presence... I'm not uncomfortable. It was a lie. He was deeply uncomfortable. He was also experiencing something else, something that felt dangerously like interest, and interest was the last thing a being like him needed. Then stay, she said, and returned to her book. He should have left. Instead, he remained in that chair while Cassandra read, and somehow the hours passed in a way that was almost companionable. At one point, she made a comment about a particularly absurd passage in the text, and before he could stop himself, he was responding to her wit with his own sharp humour. For the first time in 2 centuries, Ravenna felt something other than hunger or rage or the grinding responsibility of kingship. He felt almost alive. 3 more weeks, then another month. They fell into a pattern, though neither of them ever explicitly acknowledged it. Ravenna would find reasons to be near her. Cassandra would be there, usually reading or sometimes walking the castle corridors, and they would talk. Actually talk, not the surface pleasantries that passed for conversation in the court. She was brilliant, he discovered. She could debate theology, challenge his political strategies, and make observations about vampire society that were uncomfortably perceptive. And slowly, he realized that everything he'd been told about her was false. She wasn't a minor noble's daughter. She was the daughter of the Human Council's primary military strategist. She wasn't unremarkable. She was exactly what the council would have wanted him to have, a woman who could see through his manipulation, who couldn't be controlled or influenced, a woman who was, in many ways, a match for him. They'd made a deal with him, he suddenly understood. They'd given him something he didn't know he needed, and in return they had a pipeline into the heart of the vampire kingdom. It should have enraged him. Instead, when he realized the truth, he was sitting with Cassandra in the gardens one midnight, her hand on his arm as she pointed out constellations, and the only thing he felt was a strange, breathless sense of betrayal. Not by the council, by her. You're thinking very loudly, Cassandra said softly. I can almost hear the gears turning in that ancient head of yours. What did you realize? He turned to face her, and the violet eyes that had stopped his heart were now looking at him with something that might have been pity. You're a spy, he said flatly. I'm a bridge, she corrected. There's a difference. Is there? Yes, she said firmly. A spy serves only one master. A bridge connects 2 places that need connecting. My father sent me here to spy on you, yes, but the council sent me here to actually help you. They want peace, not because they're suddenly good or noble, but because war is expensive and peace is profitable. And they believed, correctly I think, that the only way to achieve it was through understanding. By sending me a beautiful woman who... Who what? She interrupted. Who would seduce you, who would manipulate you with her feminine wiles? Her laugh was sharp and bitter. I was supposed to be repulsive, remember? That was your entire assumption, the kingdom's assumption. When they saw how I actually looked, they decided to let events play out naturally. They thought you'd be attracted to me, that it would guarantee the arrangement's success, that you'd be more pliable if you were busy with desire. And are you, he asked, stepping closer, busy manipulating me with desire? Cassandra's expression shifted. The amusement faded, replaced by something more vulnerable, something true. No, she whispered. That's the problem. That's the only thing that was never part of the plan. And then she told him everything. The truth was this. 3 months ago, Cassandra had been dying, not politically but literally. The wasting sickness was real and it was killing her slowly, agonizingly. Her parents had already begun preparing for her death. They'd already begun their mourning. Then her father had received a proposition from someone deep in the Vampire Council. An arrangement, a marriage that would save his daughter's life and position the family's interests favorably during the coming peace negotiations. Cassandra had been given the offer as a courtesy, and she'd accepted, not because she was ambitious or because she wanted to be a spy, but because the alternative was death. She'd been prepared to be married to someone who disdained her. She'd been prepared for isolation, for bitterness, for a life of quiet resentment. What she hadn't been prepared for was Ravenna. You were supposed to be a tyrant, she said, sitting on the garden bench, her fingers twisted together. A monster who ruled through fear, and you are those things, but you're not only those things. You care about this kingdom. You carry its weight every single day. I've read your private correspondence. I've seen the battles you've fought, not just with swords, but with words and strategy. You've held together a kingdom that should have collapsed centuries ago. Stop, Ravenna said, but his voice was hollow. And then you looked at me, she continued, as if he hadn't spoken. Really looked at me, and I could see it in your face, the moment you saw something instead of nothing, the moment I became real to you, and I felt it too. I felt something shift inside my chest, and I realized that this was going to be harder than any mission. Because... She stopped, and when she looked up at him, her violet eyes were bright with unshed tears. Because I've fallen in love with you, she finished quietly. And that was never supposed to happen. I was supposed to report your weaknesses and your secrets, and instead I've decided that I'm going to protect them. I'm going to protect you, which means I'm betraying my father and my council, and I don't even know if I'm making the right choice. Ravenna should have ended it there, should have called his guards and had her locked away, should have contacted the human council and demanded explanations, should have done any number of reasonable protective things. Instead, he sat beside her on that garden bench and took her hand. Tell me everything, he said. Every detail the council wants, every strategy, every weakness they want you to exploit, all of it. She looked at him with shock. You're not. I'm going to let you deliver a message to your father, Ravenna continued, his voice steady. I'm going to make it seem like you've succeeded in your mission. I'm going to give them information, strategic information, but it will be the information I want them to have, the information that will serve both kingdoms instead of destroy one for the benefit of the other. Why would you do that? Because you're right, he said, and the words came from somewhere deep in his chest, from the part of him that had been dormant for 2 centuries. About me, about the kingdom, about what we need, and because you've chosen me over your family, your council, and your safety, and I'll be damned if I'm not going to honor that. But if they find out... They won't, he said with certainty, because my brilliant wife is going to help me, because the human council will get what they want, genuine peace, and they'll be too pleased to look too closely at how it came about, and because you're going to stop being their spy and start being my actual partner, in this kingdom, in this marriage, in all of it. You can't trust me, she said, but her hand didn't leave his. I lied to you from the beginning. Yes, you did, just as I lied to myself about you from the beginning. He turned to face her fully. We're both liars, Cassandra. That means we know what to look for in each other. We know how to catch each other in deception. But I don't think you're lying to me now. I think this is the first true thing that's happened between us. She searched his face, looking for deception, finding none. If we do this, she said slowly, if we actually become what we're pretending to be, we'd have to change everything. The kingdom would have to change. You would have to change. I would have to change. Yes, that's terrifying. Yes, he agreed. I could destroy you from the inside, she continued. Even with the best intentions, I could ruin everything. I believe that, he said, but I also believe that you won't, not because I trust you, though I'm beginning to, but because you trust yourself enough not to. What followed was the strangest courtship in vampire history, conducted in secret and in shadows. Cassandra began sending carefully crafted reports to her father. She told him of Ravenna's weaknesses, things that weren't true vulnerabilities but theatrical representations of them. She shared, classified strategies that were actually brilliant compromises, designed to make the Human Council feel victorious while strengthening the Vampire Kingdom's position. And Ravenna, for the first time in 200 years, actually governed as a partner would govern. He consulted with Cassandra on decisions. He valued her perspective. He began to change the brutal tactics that had kept his kingdom stable through fear into something more subtle, a stability built on mutual respect and genuine alliance. The vampire lords noticed. Lord Kieran, in particular, began to smile in that mysterious way that suggested he'd known something all along. "She's good for him," Bastian said to Demon one evening, watching as Ravenna discussed border patrol with Cassandra, actually listening to her suggestions and implementing them. "She's dangerous for him," Demon replied. "He's vulnerable now, that's a liability." "Or it's the first time in 200 years he's been anything other than a monument to his own power," Kieran observed quietly. "Perhaps that's something to be valued." 2 months into their new arrangement, Cassandra's father came to Thornwick Castle. General Marcus, he was called, a scarred man with intelligent eyes and the bearing of someone who'd spent his life making impossible decisions. He arrived with guards and formal ceremony, but it was clear this wasn't an official visit. He met with Ravenna in the throne room, while Cassandra waited in an adjacent chamber, barely breathing. "My daughter is alive," Marcus said without preamble. "Thriving even, you seem to be treating her well." "I'm treating her as she deserves," Ravenna replied evenly, "as my equal." Marcus studied him for a long moment, and Ravenna realized that Cassandra had inherited her ability to read people from her father. The general was seeing through every layer of diplomacy, every carefully constructed facade. "She's not feeding you information anymore," Marcus said finally. "I can tell because the information stopped being useful 6 weeks ago, started being information I would have wanted anyway, which means you're no longer treating her as an asset to be exploited." "No," Ravenna agreed, "I'm not." "You love her, it wasn't a question." "Yes." Marcus nodded slowly. "And she loves you, I can see it. She never loved easily, too smart for her own good, too aware of the cost of trust, but she trusts you." He paused. "I assume you've made some kind of arrangement with her, some understanding." "Your daughter is my wife," Ravenna said carefully. "More than that, she's my advisor and my partner. Whatever arrangement exists between us, it's one we've built together in mutual agreement." The general studied him for another long moment. Then, remarkably, he laughed. It was a rusty sound, as if he didn't do it often. "You're going to change everything, aren't you? You and my daughter, together." "Yes," Ravenna said, "I suspect we are." "Well," Marcus said, moving toward the door, "I suppose that's what we wanted all along. Not a spy in the vampire court, not manipulation and leverage, a genuine alliance, a bridge between our peoples." He paused at the doorway. "She's more yours than mine now, isn't she?" "She's her own," Ravenna corrected, "but yes, she chooses to be with me." Marcus nodded. "Then I'll tell the council the spy mission succeeded. I'll tell them you're vulnerable, that we have influence over you. I'll tell them what they want to hear, and in exchange I want you to protect her. If things change, if your feelings change, if she becomes a liability, I want your oath that she won't pay the price." "You have it," Ravenna said, "and my word that she'll never be a liability. She's the strongest thing in this kingdom." The transformation of Thornwick Kingdom was gradual, almost imperceptible at first. But over the course of a year, the borders became less militarized and more open to trade. The werewolf territories found themselves in actual negotiations instead of constant territorial disputes. The Human Council discovered that they could work with the Vampire King if the Vampire King was willing to work with them. Cassandra became officially recognized as queen, not just a ceremonial position, but a genuine seat of power. She sat beside Ravenna in council meetings. She helped draft new laws. She became the public face of a new era of cooperation, while Ravenna remained the steel that backed the peace. They never publicly acknowledged the depth of their relationship, but everyone in the kingdom knew. The vampire lords who'd been skeptical became supporters. The Human Council that had sent a spy became believers in the alliance. Even the werewolves cautiously began to treat with them fairly. 1 year after the unveiling, on the anniversary of their marriage, Ravenna and Cassandra stood once again in the great hall of Thornwick Castle. But this time, it wasn't sparse and formal. It was filled with people, vampire lords and human dignitaries, traders and warriors and common folk from 3 different species. Lord Kieran conducted a renewal of vows, a ceremony conducted in daylight, which was unprecedented. The sun streamed through windows that had been sealed for centuries, and Ravenna stood in it without flinching, his pale skin almost translucent in the light. When he looked at Cassandra, there was no mocking in his expression, no disdain, only a kind of wonder, as if he still couldn't quite believe she was real. "I never expected to find this," he said, speaking not just to her but to the assembled crowd. "I never expected to find someone who could see me clearly and choose to stay, someone who could challenge me and guide me and make me want to be something better than I was. My kingdom was dying because I was ruling alone, carrying everything myself, letting darkness be my only truth. And then she came, veiled and trembling and filled with secrets of her own, and she saved me." Cassandra's eyes were bright with tears, but she was smiling. "I came here to infiltrate a kingdom," she said. "I came here thinking I was going to betray everyone I loved to survive. I came here expecting sacrifice and pain and slow resentment. Instead, I found a man who was hiding the same loneliness I was hiding, who was carrying the same weight. I found someone who could match me intellectually and challenge me morally and make me feel seen in a way I'd never experienced before." She took his hand. "He told me I saved him. But he saved me too. When he looked at me and really saw me, for the first time in my life, I wasn't sick or weak or dying. I was just possible, and that's the greatest gift anyone has ever given me." They renewed their vows in sunlight, in front of witnesses from 3 species, and when they kissed, the people in the great hall erupted in cheers. Lord Demon leaned toward Kieran. "I never thought he had it in him." "He didn't," Kieran replied. "Not until she arrived. Sometimes," the ancient vampire added, "the most powerful magic isn't in blood or ancient spells. It's in being willing to change, being willing to let someone in." In the years that followed, Ravenna and Cassandra ruled together, and Thornwick Kingdom became something it had never been before, a place where different species coexisted not out of fear, but out of genuine mutual benefit, where laws were just and borders were secure, and power was balanced rather than wielded like a weapon. They had children, a daughter with violet eyes and midnight hair born under moonlight, a son with Ravenna's silver gaze and Cassandra's sharpness of mind. And sometimes, late at night, when the kingdom was sleeping and the torches burned low, Ravenna would find Cassandra in the library where they'd first truly spoken, and they would sit together in comfortable silence, reading or talking, or simply being present for each other. On one such night, Cassandra asked him, "Do you ever regret it, that moment when you lifted the veil, when everything changed?" Ravenna considered the question carefully. He'd had 200 years to regret things, 200 years to mourn what he'd lost in his long, dark existence. "No," he said finally. "That moment gave me everything I didn't know I was missing, a reason to care about something other than power, a partner, a future, you. Even though I was a spy." "Even because you were a spy," he corrected. "You came as a weapon trained to exploit weakness, and instead you became my greatest strength. That's better than any fairy tale, that's truth." She curled against him, and he wrapped an arm around her, and in the ancient library of Thornwick Castle, the vampire king and his human queen sat together in the kind of peace that only comes after you've been broken and remade by someone who understands the darkness inside you. The mocking vampire king had found what he didn't know he was searching for, and the dying human girl had found a life worth living. And together, they'd changed a kingdom. If this story hit you the way it hit me, and you want to experience more stories like this, longer versions, exclusive endings, bonus scenes, and stories you won't find anywhere else, join us on Patreon.